welcome to Fiber Trek. My name is Sarah. This is episode 58. Actually, I have no idea what episode it is. I'm pretty poor at the administrative thing, and I've started to notice as I've watched a number of other podcasts and greatly admire their paying attention. Oh, just a car. It's okay. Greatly admire their attention to detail and organization. That being said, as we watch this particular episode unfold, we'll have none of those elements. I realize it's been a while since I've podcasted, and I hope that you had a chance to catch up with some of my other making endeavors on the channel. I did release a sewing vlog, and I also released a vlog regarding my spinning for the Fleecewise project. And I talk about those things separately because I try to keep content to a fair minimum of about a half an hour to 40 minutes. On this particular episode, I would like to include a Wool Heroes and Heroines segment. I would like to talk about what I'm currently knitting. I have no finished objects. And I may talk a little bit about Shackleton, the Shackleton project. I'm going to talk a little bit about sweater knitting, I think. So the sweater knitting will probably become part of a larger story, choosing yarns for sweaters as I talk about some of my objects that I'm working on, items that I'm working on. So, and I have one acquisition. The making this past month has been pretty dry, and I am not 100% sure why. I really haven't done much sewing, and I really haven't done much knitting, or either that or I've entered some sort of vortex reality where, and this is what it feels like, knitting sleeves seems to be the never-ending Bermuda Triangle of garment knitting. So, yeah, so I don't know if it's me in a slump or if it is just particularly the pieces that I'm knitting on or how I'm dividing my time. I will admit that there's been a lot of family time, and that detracts from my sitting or from my focusing on particular projects, because my nephew is 3 and my niece is 18 months, and they love to play, and so do I. And so, but that doesn't always mean with needles and sewing machines. More so we play with mixers and the spinning wheel and the oven, because we're baking cookies, of course, and then out with the sheep. So we've been doing lots of chores around the barn. Anyway, I digress on what I've been doing, what I haven't been doing, what I typically do. But let's just start with works in progress, shall we? So there'll be some old gems here that you're like, God, will she ever finish those? Yes, I think I'm in the home stretch. Although the vortex, I'm just going to look. It's the other side. Phew, okay. The Bermuda Triangle vortex thing, obviously, holding me up a little bit. I know. It's a beautiful garment. The project I'm thoroughly enjoying. So it's not that I need it to get done. I mean, I love this yarn. This is a flat island fleece, two flat island fleeces that were turned into yarn by Hampton Fiber Mill. Were lovingly gifted to me from a dear friend. So let's see, what have I done? Right, well, here's one sleeve finished. I've done both of the button bands, which are done in a twisted rib. So I did this, and I did this one, and I have put on the stitches that were held for the other sleeve. I know. This sleeve took me forever. Now, I don't actually know how I knit sleeves. I was thinking about this when I was knitting this particular sleeve, because I was knitting it on a long circular needle, and I guess what I need to qualify that. I don't remember how I knit sleeves when I knit top down. I'm like, have I knit them on double points? Like, what do I do? Usually I'm knitting yoked sweaters from the top up, from the bottom up, and I knit the sleeves 2 at a time on a long circular needle, and it works really well for me. But for this particular experience, it was really just awkward. I don't know if it was the type of cable I was knitting with or what, but I was just like, it was just kind of a struggle. Like, you know, we were having this like resistance, the two of us. So, and I couldn't find 7 double points. I have since found them, as you will see. I don't know if you can hear that wind, but hopefully it's not too distracting. You'll see I found my 7 double points. So I think part of the reason it took me so long is just because of the awkwardness of the motion, and I was really, it took me a long time to like pull the needle out and figure out everybody's little, you know, place that they wanted to be without stretching oddly. So anyway, I have tried it on. It does fit. I'm pleased with the fit. It's not too baggy, and because there is no shaping, I was a little concerned about that. There's no shaping at all, and so I was like, oh God, is it just going to look like a big, you know, sack from like my shoulder to my hip? My narrowest point is my waist, and I've got very broad shoulders and very broad hips, and so when you just kind of go from shoulder to hip, just like, but in effect, the butt, you know, it's got enough of a fit, you know, it's not super baggy, so it does kind of come in and form fit to my figure. This is being housed in my favorite bags by Matterroot, and she is out of Old Town, Maine, and this is her linen sheep bag. I've showed this to you before, and I've got my Fisher Lassie pin from the Net Loft here, and voila, skis. Right, I know, this one again, although I made super duper progress on it. So this is Love and Lemons by Melanie Berg, and I'm doing this out of the Quince & Company Piper, which is a Texas mohair and American merino. I don't know if it's Texan merino and Texan mohair or not, but I finished the first skein, and just giving me quite a bit of, you know, and I just wound today. I finished that first skein like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I just wound the second skein today to see if I could finish that one up. And if you're interested, this is my Where the Wild Things Are bag by Little Skein in the Big Wool, which is very apropos. My nephew has been very much into, we read this book, he and I together, sometimes 2 or 3 times in a row, and he does all the lines, of course, and he has gotten into wanting to wild rumpus with the family, especially when Uncle Rob is here. And so we go outside and we howl at the moon and we run around and we wild rumpus. And so, anyway, I'm so psyched that he loves that book, because I've always loved that book. And he'll always, sometimes I'll say, we'll be out and be doing something, or the sheep will be being naughty, and I say, what does Max say? And he goes, be still! Because that's what Max says to the wild things when he gets to the land of the wild things. Right, so I had kind of found myself in a bind last night. I didn't really want to knit on that sleeve. I didn't want to get up and wind the yarn for that shawl, which is lovely, and I want that product, but it's gotten a bit repetitive, and I was a little bit like, hello, sweet dog. Do you want to come here? So I went into some of my projects that I had brought down from northern Maine. I'm in southern Maine right now. I typically live in the north woods, the north country, and lo and behold, what did I find? But my original entry into Louise of Knit British and Isla of Bright Yarn, they did a Natural Shades knit along, and this was I got this done in time for the deadline. I just didn't get the second one done. So this is all my hand spun. This is hand spun Shetland, it says a chain ply that I did from a Contented Butterfly gradient that I bought at New Hampshire Sheep and Wool. And this is some of my original homespun Icelandic from Galena, who is long gone now, but was a gorgeous ewe and with a gorgeous fleece. And I actually have 3 pairs of mittens out of out of this handspun that I did. So this is a Stephanie Pearl McPhee pattern, and it's a cowl and then this matching set. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me right now. Come here, sweet dog. So this is just kind of a slip stitch motif along here. And then, of course, just the yarn. So what I like about this is that this chain ply adds quite a bit of structure. She's right here. Do you want to come over? Can you come right here? Adds quite a bit of structure at the cuff. So it has a real nice gauntlet feel. And then this is a little bit more lofty and airy. So this has quite a bit of density to it. And this has a little bit more loftiness and airiness to the actual mitten. So I get a little bit more movement within the mitt. So anyway, that one was already done. And wow, wouldn't you know it, it only took me like 4 hours to get this to where it needed to be. So I picked this up below the thumb yesterday. Here, I needed to finish my increases for the thumb gusset and then work my way to the top. And then I picked it for the thumb, and I'm almost ready to decrease for that, and then it's just weaving in some ends. So, yeah, boo on you, Fiber Trek, for just not getting it done for the deadline. Then I could have had mittens all winter last winter. I think it was last winter. I can't remember if it was in the spring or not. I can't remember how long this has been languishing, but who knew? I have a large pack basket that Rob made, and it sits next to the couch, and I've like just put my projects in there. I have projects that I want to do in there that are already in a bag with the needles, and I have projects that I'm working on. And this must have just gotten stuff piled on it, and I just got distracted. So it was nice to pull that back out, get it finished, and yay, mittens for me. You wouldn't know it. It's December here in Maine. If you follow my husband at Paddle to the Sea on Instagram, you'll have seen that at our house, we got 12 inches of snow, and he's actually headed up onto Katahdin, and there was 21 inches at Roaring Brook, which is the first campground, and then you kind of ascend up to the second campground, which is just below tree line, and so he's doing that ascent, and if you follow him on Instagram, I'm sure you'll see some fun pictures of the mountain in the wintertime. Anyway, he's snowmobiling and skiing, and I am sitting out here in my sweater and almost kind of in the sunshine. Right, so that's done, and this is in a Bling Your String bag, which was a signature bag that she did for our Highlands on the Fly 2 years ago. And I cast on a project. So I have been kind of pining a little bit for an old friend. Some of you who have watched the podcast for a while will remember I had a dog named Fern. She was a Great Pyrenees, and I lost her about a year ago. And in the process of kind of moving on from that, my friend Sarah of Upton Yarns had done some hand dyeing, and she was looking for looking for a colorway name or a name for color for her particular 3-ply Coopworth yarn, and I saw that and I offered up the name Fern's Watch, and I guess I'll tell you why. So Fern originally came into my life as a guard dog, and she did guard my sheep at the farm, and she was a really awesome and amazing dog. And you'd go down, and I did chores morning and afternoon every single day, and I'd go down, and sometimes she'd be laying in front of the barn and all the sheep would be in the barn, or I could see her move everybody around. She's just a really intuitive dog. And so when I would go down there at dusk on the farm, that was her time. That was her moment. So Sarah had dyed up this gorgeous kind of dusky purple kind of look. It's a little bit lighter than what you're seeing there. And I offered the name up Fern's Watch, because this is the time of day Fern would be out. And somebody generously purchased this and gave me the lot as I was preparing to go buy it all, of course. And I've been looking for the perfect project for this, and I thought I had found one, and it didn't work out. But anyway, I've really been missing her lately, and I thought, I need to really put this on the needles and I found a great pattern by Andrea Mowry. It's called the Ramble Shawl, and it's a garter stitch and brioche shawl. So it's a garter stitch stripe in 2 colors, and then a brioche section that kind of has like a chevron or a feather feel to it. So I talked to Sarah about that. I needed a contrasting color, and she generously dyed up this silver birch for me, so, which is just a gray, of course. And I'm going to do that shawl in these 2 colors. So I've cast that on, and it's in another Annie big skein, little skein in the big wool bag, my Anna Green Gables bag, which feels apropos because she was such a kindred spirit to me. So that's everything that I'm working on. I'm going to check on my dog, and there'll be a little editing moment here. Right, so that's kind of everything I have on the needles right now that's, in action. I have a couple other things I'm thinking I'm going to cast on. Quick projects, just to kind of freshen the palette a little bit. What do they call that? A mouche bouche? I think I just heard a donkey. Did you hear that? So, right, so if anything else comes down the pike, it'll probably be a hat, or yeah, I think it's a hat. That's kind of what I've got in the back of my mind. For acquisitions and discoveries, I picked up a sweater's worth of yarn from Odysseer, or Ellen Mason, and her blog spot is basically that, odysseer.blogspot.com. This is 4 ounces, 210 yards of Cheviot Clune Forest and Maritime wool. Ellen has this spun in Prince Edward Island at, the mill name eludes me. It might come to me. But anyway, so here it is. It's gray. It's an oatmeal gray. So it's kind of a brownie gray. What I loved about this was, of course, the story. And this is called Doc Mason's wool. And I'm hoping right now I can recall it. But he, I believe it's Ellen's brother, and he is a veterinarian. And on his farm, he has these sheep to help rehabilitate border collies and rescue and train border collies, etc. So near and dear to my heart, of course, is dogs and then wool. So I didn't think there could be a better story for me to invest in than this one. And so I am planning to do Lemster by Norgon out of this, which is a free pattern on Knitty. It's a kind of a cable-y pattern, and I thought that this kind of beautiful natural oatmeal gray in the cables in the maritime would have a real appeal. So it's a nice round yarn, which also I think will appeal to the cables, and nice and cushy. And the name of the mill in Prince Edward Island continues to elude me. So anyway, I got enough to do that. And she does have, on her Etsy shop now, she does have some that she has dyed. So I would run right over there and grab up some wool from Doc Mason. Which leads me to talk about sweaters. A while back we had that question about sweater knitting, the best kind of yarns, maybe breeds for sweater knitting, and especially sweater knitting in Maine. And I had begun to talk a little bit about preparation of fibers. And I think we had kind of gotten to the point where we were looking at worsted, where everybody's combed and lined up and only the strong fibers are a part of the preparation, to woolen, which is where everybody kind of goes in mumbo-jumbo-y and it's just kind of everything that there is, and you're not really getting rid of any of the weaker fibers. Excuse me. So, and I think I wanted to move on to talk about ply, and really at the crux of that conversation is going to be about surface area and staple length. So the shorter your staple length and the more surface area that there is, the more opportunity little fibers are going to come out of the twist, and they're going to rub and create pills. So the more twist you have, the less opportunity there are for those little ends of those fibers to wisp away and pill up. So if you think about that in terms of ply, so a 3-ply has far less surface area. You've got more energy and more coverage. So 3-plies tend to have less opportunity to pill. And I guess I used 3-ply, but I mean anything above that. Ganseys typically knit in a 5-ply at a very dense gauge, would have very little surface area for those fibers to escape, which was why they wear like iron. Your singles merino, on the other hand, which has very little twist that goes into it, very short, fine fibers that are prone to breaking, is going to have a lot of pills. You know, I think about underarms, or when you get into your car and your sweater rubs against the back, that type of thing. All that's going to do is continue to take those small broken fibers or any ends of those fibers out of the twist and pill them. When we start to think about breeds, I know I just mentioned merino. Hold on, dog right, so we kind of have yarn structure, how we're going to put the fiber into yarn. We have ply, we have prep to think about. Breed specificity, when I think about specific breeds for sweater wear, I'm always going to be thinking about the staple length and kind of perhaps the category of fineness. So the longer the staple length, the less opportunity there is for smaller, tiny fibers that don't get caught in the twist to escape the twist and pill. You also have I believe, higher tensile strength in those longer fibers, and they typically are prepared in a worsted style, or historically, maybe I should say, in a worsted preparation where all the fibers are aligned so you get even stronger, lots of drape, lots of luster, not as much warmth in those longer, in those types of preparations. Talked about that before. But it's not to be disparaging of some of our shorter staple fibers, because they have just as much to play in our wardrobe and keeping us warm and being a garment as the longer wools. I think it also depends on your tolerance for pills and the amount of maintenance you want to do on your sweater. So you can, again, I think when breeds are important and they have their place and they can lend themselves to particular projects, but at the end of the day, we're going to think about how that was prepped and the structure of the yarn. Does that make sense? Is that at all helpful? Anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because that question has kind of been languishing in the background, and I felt like it was something important to words elude me. Something important to touch on, because I do knit a lot of garments. It tends to be what I gravitate to. There's no particular fleece in Maine that I think is going to be any better than another. You know, I've got a North Ronaldsay sweater I love. This is Shetland. I have Lincoln. I have I have a Starcroft, so I have Nash Island. I've got a Romney sweater. I've got, so any, go where the wind will take you with that. Looking forward to knitting up the Clune Forest, Cheviot, and Maritime wool into a sweater. And that, again, typically if I have my druthers, I want a 3-ply. But this is such a great story, and I'm thinking about tightening up my gauge a little bit to kind of compensate for the fact that there maybe is only 2 plies. We'll see what happens, but it's not going to bother me. I just want a beautiful sweater out of this yarn with this story to connect. So there's a lot of there's a continuum there for making choices. Right, so I hope that information regarding the sweaters was somewhat helpful or inspirational. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in learning more about yarn structure, that you take a look at some resources, including Rachel of Wool and Spinning Podcast talks a lot about yarn structure, Emily of Fibertown, Sarah of Yarns at Yenhu, of course, the Fleece-wise conversation. But Judith McKenzie, her videos and her books are so interesting. and so worth investing in. And, you know, she really gives you a lot of information, technical information, which as a knitter can help you understand your materials a little bit better. Deb Robeson, of course, Hand Spinning Rare Breeds, and Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook. So from here, that's where I would go. I think that what I've been able to offer you is somewhat shallow. I think that there's a lot of depth that, you know, you could go anywhere within that continuum that we talked about. Breeds, plies, preparation, fascinating, and you don't need to be a spinner necessarily to be interested, although I would recommend grabbing some fleece and and drop spindling and drop spindle and give it a try. I'm getting cold, I can tell, because my words are getting mussed. Right, so that was my little, you know, tangent on sweaters. And if there are further questions, please feel free to post them in the thread. I want to talk a little bit about Wool Heroes and Heroines. I'm hoping that that gets edited and inserted here. I think that it's timely, and I have just cast on some Upton yarns, and I get to interview Sarah and talk to her about her dyeing process. If you don't follow Sarah on Instagram, then you're missing out on some really spectacular adventure. And I would recommend that you head on over to Instagram if you're on Instagram and take a look at what she's doing. She is in in Central America right now. She came back from Alaska, and now she's off down to the rainforest, and member of the fiber community, and has a lot to offer. I hope you enjoy the interview. I'm not really sure. We don't remember what the footage was, but I just told her I would edit it in an appropriate type fashion so we didn't both look super awkward, which we're both pretty good at looking super awkward. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side. So I'm so excited that Sarah from Upton Yarns was able to come up to Smith Pond, all the way up the interstate, all 240 miles into the Northwoods, to both visit, and I figured I would take advantage of some of her work and do a Wool Heroes and Heroines segment. So for those of you who don't know Upton Yarns, she's a natural dyer operating out of Massachusetts at the moment, but curating fleeces in New England and primarily Maine.
Yeah, New England, Maine entirely right now, although one of these days I'll expand.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't want to like hem you into one
that
thing.
That was the New England yarn part of the thing. But yes, I might yet find interesting fleeces elsewhere.
And so she had some Ganzi yarn to dye, and I thought it would be interesting to talk to her about indigo dyeing. So I'm going to have her bring you up to our current point and describe our end goal. So do you want to, bring us up to where we're at.
Okay, so current point, I feel like I'm doing a cooking show right now.
Yeah.
We have, so current point, we have a stock solution full of indigo stock, and this is, I did not bring it out, dear. Well, I work with an indigo extract, which is a powder, and it doesn't dissolve in water at a normal pH, so you make a very, very alkali solution that allows it to dissolve, and then you deoxygenate that solution, and then it's this. And this will go into this pot, which is basically a lot of water at about 130 degrees right now, that has some salt and a squirt of dish soap, and then also the chemical that deoxygenates the water. And I'll explain why deoxygenating the water is important at a later moment. And then I have a bucket full of carefully scoured Ganzi yarn. So the next step for me is to put a little bit of the stock solution in here, and then let it sort of sit for a few minutes, let little chemical reactions happen, and then check the pH and make sure that the oxygen level is correct. There's got to be a better way to say that. Anyway.
We don't want to go too technical.
Right. So to explain why the oxygen is important, indigo in its blue form doesn't actually stick to anything. This is oversimplifying quite a bit, but my high school chemistry was a long time ago. So when indigo is blue, it doesn't actually want to stick. So part of dyeing with indigo is breaking up the indigo molecule such that it becomes its two precursor chemicals. And its two precursor forms are basically held together by an oxygen molecule. So once you break that up, There we go, that's better. Once you break that up, the precursor forms will stick to things. So basically, indigo dyeing, you very carefully take this blue, break it apart, the broken bits will hold on to things, and then when you re-expose it to oxygen, which is this magic aha moment, it all turns blue again. So that's that. And now I'm just going to let this sit, put the lid back on, let it sit for 10 minutes.
And that's our goal, is to dye yarn blue.
Yes, yeah, lots of yarn blue, and it's a multiple dip process. So the first dip tends to be pretty light, and then subsequent dips will make it a little darker every time.
And Gansey yarn is a specific type of yarn for Gansey sweaters. It's 5-ply, traditionally worsted spun, just in case that's a new term for you.
Oh, right. Sorry.
So that's
Yes.
all right. No. All right, so that's our end game. We're going to let this do
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So we'll be back. This time it will probably just be Sarah because I'll be handling the camera. So we're going to wait for magic because I don't necessarily have a lot of vocabulary to describe what we're waiting for. And I thought while we were doing that, we would just talk to Sarah a little bit about her history, your interest in natural dyeing, and maybe we'll start there with how did you come to this particular piece of the craft? So why dyeing? Why making your own yarn?
Well, the making my own yarn part was a sort of building frustration that that local yarns were a little bit harder to find. That I found myself, I kept importing yarn from the UK, and it felt ridiculous because we were in Maine, and there are lots and lots of sheep in Maine, and why can't I buy a local? This was 5 or 6 years ago now. The scene has changed, as you know, quite a bit since then. There are a lot more local small producers, but 5 or 6 years ago, I think we were probably all part of the same zeitgeist of, but why can't we buy local? We have sheep. So that was part of it. And then at the time, we'd just moved to Maine. I was moving back to land. There's a longer story there, and we joined a CSA. Really good winter CSA, Buckwheat Blossom Farm. They're in Wiscasset. They're fantastic. They have amazing Coopworth sheep. And it was a CSA pickup one evening, and she had, Amy had a display of sort of her yarn and a few other things you could sort of add to your CSA pickup. And her yarn, it was just this amazing, glowing, beautiful, lustrous Coopworth yarn that she'd had spun into a 2-ply Aran weight, and it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. And so that was one of the little kicks to be like, oh, not only are there sheep here, but they're really gorgeous, unique. It's just so much more interesting,
Right.
Which I think is the natural dyeing element for me as well, is that it's just so much more interesting. There's so many other pieces and things to think about, and the history, and I'm sort of prone to history anyway, because my background's in archaeology, and so anything that kind of ties back into that thread is just extra plus good.
Somebody is very excited about that.
I know.
I hope you could actually hear what Sarah just said. It was very
Quiet in the peanut gallery.
It was very profound. I was thinking,
Sure, very profound indeed. Anyway.
We should have brought over some of the colors.
Natural dyes are kind of like, think back to kindergarten, the way you mix paints. There are, weld makes a very bright yellow, and then you dip that in indigo and you get a very bright green, or vibrant green. You can. I tend to use a lot of madder root as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you,
For
what
reds.
else do you use? We have indigo.
Right,
I heard madder root.
I tend to, indigo, madder root, and weld are my big three, because, weld is a very bright yellow. Madder root lends itself to a very sort of strong red, a little bit more towards the brick side, and then from there you can build most colors. I also will use lac, which is an insect. It's an old world insect. It's a little bit, I don't know if people are familiar with cochineal.
Right.
Insects, it eats totally different things, and I don't think they're related, but one of the interesting things about natural dyes is that the more you sort of look at what chemicals are produced by a given thing, the more you realize that, it's the same way that tea produces caffeine and coffee plants produce caffeine, but they don't actually have anything to do with each other. There's just this stability in the plant and animal kingdom that keeps being repeated by very different creatures.
Right. But you use lac.
Right, but I use lac. Lac tends to do, cochineal is very, very vibrant. black tends to be a little bit more sort of maroony. There's no good reason why I use one, not the other. I think I like the kind of maroony purples that come from black a little bit more, and cochineal's something I'll be playing around with in the future.
And I've also seen you use walnut.
Oh yes.
Tannin.
Tannin is less of a dye in and of itself, and more of a mordant. It's a very, you use it a lot with cotton, although I have less experience dyeing cotton, but when you combine tannin with iron, you tend to get dark browns into blacks, and so black is actually an incredibly difficult color to dye, but you end up with sort of darker browns, and it's more, with the tannin and iron, it's more about the reaction that I'm looking for with iron. I do a silver, which I don't think I have any of, that's basically just, yarn dipped in tannin and iron, and it kind of pulls it a little bit silver gray, which is really nice.
Is that the silver birch that I have?
Yes, that is the silver birch. I do have some of that in
I
the
have
card.
mass quantities of that.
Thank you for remembering that.
I'm like, no, that seems to be my thing. Excellent. So
Yes. These three, since we're talking about indigo today, these three are all dyed just with indigo. And the way you create darker colors with indigo is through multiple dips and exposure to air. So you sort of build that indigo slowly. So that's one dip, and that's probably 2 dips, depending on the strength of how much indigo is in the pot. And that was probably 3, 4, maybe 5. And then my dye palette, I tend to, if you remember back to kindergarten, I have a good yellow, which is weld. I have a good red, which is madder, primarily. And then from there, you can dip them in indigo and get the whole run.
So you have an online presence.
I do.
And you are going around Maine and picking up fleeces.
Yes.
Sending them to Stonehenge.
Yep. Yes.
And dyeing in your kitchen.
Yes. And it's definitely dyeing in my kitchen.
Yeah.
Dyeing my kitchen and the bathtub. You'll see that indigo gets very, very drippy, because the part of dyeing with indigo is exposing it to oxygen and letting that reaction take place so that it turns blue again. And it's really cool, but you need a place where it can drip, and I'm not currently in a place where that can happen. So the bathroom gets involved as well. And I have a very understanding husband, and that's lovely.
So can you talk a little bit about your own knitting? Like, what do you knit with, and what are you drawn to for patterns, or what are you knitting right now, let's say?
Oh dear. Well, knitting right now is a Kate Davies, a Fantouche, a shawl. I have a kind of I really love knitting Ganseys. That's my focus, obviously, and one of the major things that drew me into all of this. Sort of a quick backup. I work on boats. I have a background in traditional rig, schooners mostly. So my life currently is very bifurcated. I'm home 6 weeks and I'm on the boat 6 weeks. So that kind of screws up my dyeing schedule and my knitting schedule, more importantly, because I can't really bring sweaters worth of yarn in my luggage. So I tend to have a sweater at home, although I'm in between sweaters. And then endless gloves. I don't know why gloves.
And yeah, so it's Fantouches on the needles right now.
Fantouche on the needles. I have a 3-ply Romney more than Cotswold.
Right.
There's a story there. It's ridiculous. That I dyed. It's a nice sort of mid-brown color, and I over-dyed it.
Oh, our
There we
timer
go.
went off, so we've got to do some dyeing work.
So when we left you, we were waiting for the pot to do its magic, for lack of better vocabulary, on my part, of course. And
magic covers it pretty well. Let's go with magic.
basically, Sarah's described that we've broken apart molecules so they can bind.
we have broken apart the indigotin molecule. I think it's indigotin. Anyway. We've broken apart the indigo molecule, so
Right.
it's now free of its oxygen. You'll notice the thing that I'm looking for. So this was a nice dark blue in the stock pot, which I don't know if that's something you can see.
Hold on. There's the focus.
There's the focus.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a dark, dark indigo.
Okay.
And you can see the stain, actually, that it's left on the table that we're not going to talk about. And then once it goes through that chemical transformation, it kind of turns into this greeny yellow color. I don't know if you can pick that up.
We can pick that up.
You can pick that up. So that greeny yellow is really what I want to see. It's one of those things that you just sort of do it over and over again, and you get a feel for what happens when it's too yellow? Well, when it's too yellow, it doesn't really stick very well. And when it's too green, it also doesn't stick very well. And worst case scenario, like I said, the process of indigo dyeing is just multiple dips. So you find, if you screw up one way or the other, you just wait a half hour and do it again. And then this is pH paper. So testing the pH of the vat is very important, because indigo doesn't dissolve in a liquid solution until the pH is very high. And remember, 7 is neutral. Higher numbers mean more alkali, and lower numbers mean more acidic. And looking at my pH paper, it's a little too acidic still, so I'm going to add a little bit of washing soda, which is very, very caustic, and will bring the pH up. And then because I'm introducing a little bit more oxygen, that's just sort of in amongst the little molecules of washing soda, I'm going to give it a little bit more hydrose. And hydrosodium sulfate is one of the chemicals that is commercially available to deoxygenate liquids.
All right, so if you haven't figured it out, we are dipping the skeins. Sarah has scoured these to get the spinning grease off and any other residual dirt, and is going in the pot.
It's going in the pot, and I'm just making sure, once I put it in, that I keep it below the level of the pot, because we've worked so hard to get all the oxygen out of this solution that if I stir it up too much, if I squish more air in there, I don't want the indigo to reform into its more stable state before it has sort of dyed the yarn the way I want it to. So that was 3 minutes. A careful yarn massaging. And then we're going to pull it out of the vat, and this is the moment of truth. It's coming out this weird yellow, kind of off-putting yellow color, and then you'll see, as it is exposed to air, and that molecule reforms, it turns, I don't know if you can see, it turns blue. Ta-da! And then I will let it air dry, or hang in the air and kind of drip for usually about a half hour. Where's my line? So that it can fully be exposed to air and reform itself. So I'm just going to enact that. So this is all going back in for a second dip, because as I've been saying, dyeing with indigo is an iterative process. It's all about multiple dips. And I want this to get to a medium blue, so it's going to go through at least one more dip, maybe two. One of the things to know about indigo is it does, excuse me one moment, it does something called crocking. And crocking, basically, so as we were sort of talking about needing to break the indigo molecule up in order for it to stick to things, sometimes in its broken up state it doesn't adhere completely to the yarn. Leaving it in a state that it can break free really easily. And sort of the final step with indigo indigo dyed things is giving them kind of a rough, comey scrub, and that will break a lot of those particles off. But to really do it thoroughly, sometimes when you're knitting, you'll end up breaking some of those particles off that hadn't been completely broken off before. And so sometimes when you're knitting with indigo dyed yarn, you'll notice that your hands and your knitting needles turn blue. And that's you're not being dyed with indigo, because basically those particles at that point are sort of like fine chalk dust. So it's sort of like getting fine chalk dust stuck on your hands. So you'll notice I usually get a ring around the finger I use to tension. And that's basically those last little particles of indigo being knocked free. And it shouldn't end up discoloring underlying clothing. It should be a finite process. It should be, while you're knitting, you're getting that last little bit off. And that always is very easily gotten rid of with soap and water, because you're not dyeing, it's not sticking to anything. And not all indigo dyed yarn does that. There's sometimes it doesn't happen at all and you won't have any crocking, and sometimes it does. And the variables are a mystery to everybody. Anyways, that's just a heads up.
So I don't have to worry about that when I go to block it or give it the garment its final wash.
There's nothing you can do in that situation that will increase it or decrease the likelihood of it. I think if you're concerned at all about, you know, your yarn was crocking while you're knitting and you're not entirely sure if it's entirely free of crocking, maybe don't wear it over a white shirt the first time.
Right.
But it's something that, you know, knitting should take care of the last stages of.
Okay, so if I was doing color work with white and I went to put it in the water to finish it off, it's not going to dye the other yarn.
No, because what may happen when you're doing color work with white is that it will stain the white yarn that you're knitting it in conjunction with. And I have had feedback, from a customer who said that's happened when she was knitting Songkar gloves. And in that situation, when you do your final blocking, your rinse, that indigo in that situation just rinses right out.
Got it.
She was concerned because her white yarn was being turned light blue. And then when she blocked her yarn and gave it that final rinse, it rinsed clear and has had no problems since.
Okay.
But that is something to be aware of when you're doing color work with them.
Right.
So the other thing you'll notice, when I'm really dyeing a lot of indigo, I'm not always so great with the gloves, and so my hands will turn blue. But in that situation, that's dyeing. So this is less dramatic because the yarn, as you remember, was pretty blue going in. But it should be a little darker than it was. And you can see it darkening back up. It's kind of that weird teal coming out. And now it's only a little bit darker, which is what you want. You're sort of slowly building color.
Well, Sarah and I are looking forward to a bowl of ice cream and a movie and some knitting. We're hoping we can fit that in.
We'll see if it all works.
We may have overplanned our time together and our stay with lots of cooking and granola making and this and that, but have now decided that an afternoon of ice cream eating and movie watching might be in our best interest. So we're going to sign off from Wool Heroes and Heroines. You can find Sarah's yarns at uptonyarns.squarespace.com.
Nope, just uptonyarns.com.
Just uptonyarns.com. You can also...
Squarespace, it is a Squarespace.
Okay.
It will redirect. Keep it simple.
uptonyarns.com. You can follow her blog, and she is on Instagram and documenting her travels at sea as well as her dyeing. So thank you so much, Sarah. I'm sorry I'm not on the other side of the camera this time, but and we'll probably be heading back over to the podcast. So
I think I'm off center. Sorry about that. That's my camera. I'll just see if I can prop up one side of me. How's that? Is that better? I hope that you enjoyed the interview with Sarah. I recognize I was supposed to do a giveaway on this episode. I'm going to let that go just so that I can move forward with some of this other content and in a timely way. I haven't done anything on my Shackleton, as you probably deduced. If you're interested in more about what I'm doing, spinning-wise and sewing, check out those other two vlogs that I did. And wherever your fiber treks may take you, may you return home safe and with lots of fiber. I'll see you next time.